I living my life right? Did I make the correct choice? But in reality, we are on a spiritual treadmill. Borrowing someone else's road destroys our integrity and erases our very essence. You can be anything. This is the ultimate deception of the ego. You are trying to run a high-end graphic design software on a pocket calculator. A rose doesn't compete with a cedar tree. You don't need to design your life, you only need to decode it. The experience as a phenomenon of the psyche is real, but its interpretation by the ego is an illusion. And this is the cosmic joke of existence. Today we're going to talk about something we've spent our entire lives searching for, yet paradoxically have never actually lost: our path. We've been conditioned to think of our life path as a trail in the woods or a highway stretching between cities. We assume there is a me, the traveler, and then there is the path, some external trajectory that we need to find, guess, build, or, God forbid, conquer. We buy courses to find our true calling, we visit astrologers, and we agonizingly question ourselves. Am I living my life right? Did I make the correct choice? But what if the fundamental mistake lies in this very separation? What if there's no path existing independently of you? You are not walking a path. You are the path. Let us bring this down to the level of matter. Each of us embodies into this world with an entirely unique set of factory settings. Our physical body, our nervous system, our genetics, our specific filters of perception. In modern science, specifically in fields like epigenetics and neurobiology, there is a clear understanding that an organism is evolutionarily wired to unfold its optimal potential. A rose doesn't compete with a cedar tree. A grasshopper doesn't try to become a horse. It carries within itself the perfect blueprint of a grasshopper. When we are born, we don't receive a map of the terrain. We are the terrain, and we are the movement. At the moment of our birth, consciousness is not separated from the trajectory of its own unfolding. Wherever consciousness leads us, that is exactly what we do. A child doesn't overthink whether they are crawling the right way or crying sincerely. They are simply embodying the flow of existence. The unique settings of your body are not limitations, they are the riverbanks. You have a specific type of nervous system. Perhaps you are deeply sensitive and vulnerable, or conversely highly resilient and assertive. You have your own energy levels, your own innate inclinations, and this entire biological apparatus was designed for one single purpose: to guide you along the timeline that realizes the potential of this exact physical form. Consciousness chose this specific vessel because only through it can gather a precise experience. In the ancient Chinese philosophy of Taoism, there is a fundamental concept called de or te. It is often translated as virtue, but its true meaning runs much deeper. De is the individual expression of the universal order, the Tao, within a specific thing or human being. It is your inner nature, your raw potential. To live your true path means to allow your de to unfold naturally, without forcing yourself. This is what the Taoists called Wu Wei, effortless action, or moving along the path of least resistance. And right here lies a critical realization. Without it, it is impossible to understand the very nature of the seeker's trap. And this isn't just about Taoism. If you look closely at almost any ancient tradition, whether it's the radical surrender in Sufism, the concept of not my will but thine in Christian mysticism, or the effortless abiding of Advaita Vedanta, they all fundamentally agree on one thing: true self-realization is the art of completely ceasing your resistance to life. Yet, our modern approach to self-discovery is nothing but force. We take the profound idea of alignment and immediately turn it into another exhausting ego project. a desperate, aggressive struggle to fix what we think is broken. Because of this, most of us don't feel like we're in a dead end. We feel like we're moving, progressing, and doing the heavy spiritual work. But in reality, we are on a spiritual treadmill, exhausting ourselves, running in circles within our own mental labyrinths, completely unaware that we aren't going anywhere. To understand why this search turns into a rigid mental control that keeps us stuck, we have to look under the hood of human architecture and see where this natural flow gets blocked. Look at the world around us. Every living thing in nature operates in a state of natural harmony. Animals live by the law of effortless action, the law of Wu Wei, perfectly. They don't build mental labyrinths and they never try to fix or change their own nature. But the human design is different. We are equipped with a highly complex reflective mechanism, a prism that can either perfectly align with the flow of life or completely distort it. So how does exactly the highest impersonal consciousness touch down and interface with this dense material world in human being? It does so through what Eastern traditions call the subtle body and what modern psychology refers to as our mental and emotional sphere. As we broke down in detail in the previous episode, this intermediate layer is precisely what ancient traditions meant when they spoke of the soul. Remember, the soul is not some separate entity trapped inside your chest. It is an inner environment. It is the soul conductor, the only bridge connecting pure spirit to physical reality. When this bridge is clear, everything functions in a beautiful, natural way. Imagine absolutely pure, flawless crystal, or the perfectly still surface of a mountain lake. Consciousness is the light. Passing through a transparent mental and emotional environment, this light falls onto the material world, allowing us to live a pure, authentic experience. We rejoice when we feel joy, we weep when we feel pain. We act from an impulse of crystal clarity. In that very moment, we are completely aligned with our true nature. This is exactly what mystics across all traditions and epochs have pointed to. In Sufism, it is the pure heart, the kalp, capable of reflecting divine qualities. In Buddhism, it is Buddha nature, Tathagata, which is intrinsically pure and present within every living being from the very beginning. When your inner environment is transparent, you don't doubt your path. In fact, you don't even think about it. You simply live reality second by second. You respond to the world, and the world responds to you. And here is the core of the issue. This bridge can be broken. If the soul, this subtle environment, is clouded by trauma and rigid concepts, it loses its transparency, completely rupturing the direct alignment between consciousness and matter. Usually this begins with what psychotherapists call socialization and mystics call falling asleep or the fall. It is during this process that our inner crystal gets scratched and we begin to build those very mental labyrinths that keep us stuck. The transparency of your inner environment is compromised. Layers upon layers begin to coat the crystal clear glass. What are these layers? They are the defense mechanisms we build to protect ourselves, which eventually turned into our prison. If we peel them back, we always find the same few elements. First is the childhood trauma, when we are rejected for who we truly are and we decide to change just to survive. Then come the blocks in the body and psyche, unexpressed emotions trapped within our muscular armor. Next, our judgment and conditioning, the rigid rules of you can't do that or you need to be different. And finally, the crushing weight of expectations from parents, society, and partners. The glass grows dull, covered in cracks and grime. And as the light of consciousness passes through this warped, opaque medium, it is heavily distorted. We begin to perceive a twisted version of reality. viewing everything through the lens of fear, scarcity, resentment, and guilt. This is the exact birthplace of what we call the ego, a false personality structure, a mental construct that boldly claims, I know best, I will control everything, I will create my own path. In this moment, a massive chasm opens up between how life actually feels in real time and how it looks from the outside. Carl Jung captured a fascinating phenomenon. When we look back at our lives, they begin to seem remarkably meaningful, as if guided by a hidden pattern. Life takes on the logic of a dream. Within a dream, the most bizarre, improbable things can happen. Yet while we're inside it, we rarely question them. They feel entirely appropriate. The same applies to our waking life. All our dead ends, our accidental encounters, and the moments we thought we were completely lost ended up leading us precisely to where we stand today. Yet when we are living the life right now, in the present moment, this hidden pattern remains completely invisible. Everything feels chaotic, anxious, and random. Unable to see the bigger picture through the polluted filter of the mind, the ego panics and begins frantically constructing artificial roads. Christian tradition speaks of this metaphorically through the story of the expulsion from paradise. Paradise is not a geographical location. It is a state of original purity and oneness with God, with consciousness, where Adam and Eve were the path itself. Eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil represents the birth of the dualistic mind, the arrival of value judgments, condemnation, and shame. Remember, and they saw that they were naked. The ego emerged, the inner environment became clouded, and people felt severed from the source. We stepped off the path of effortless being. And this expulsion from the paradise is happening right now, every single day, just set against the backdrop of the 21st century. Cut off from the source, blinded ego panically tries to compensate for the loss of its internal navigation. And it is precisely from this deep spiritual orphan trauma that the ultimate myth of our time is born. Modern culture, especially the culture of hustle, toxic productivity, and pop psychology, preys on this disorientation. It sells us a beautiful yet deeply toxic illusion. You can be anything. You can build absolutely any path you want. All it takes is enough visualization, the right manifestation board, and relentless hard work. But behind every glittering billboard lies a harsh reality. This is the ultimate deception of the ego. You cannot create just any path. You cannot live someone else's life. Every attempt by the ego to force a sensitive melancholic to become a cutthroat corporate leader or a born craftsman to become a grand spiritual guru leads only to neurosis, depression, and psychosomatic illness. Why? Because it is an act of violence against your factory settings. We are designed to walk our own path, the timeline of unfolding highest potential of this specific body. Often under the influence of childhood trauma and deficit of love, we begin dividing the world into bad and good paths. We fool ourselves into thinking that being a wealthy, famous artist or a top executive is a good, a right path, while raising chickens in the village or quietly baking bread is bad or unworthy. This is a profound illusion. The ego truly believes that happiness can be achieved simply by copying someone else's glossy, curated map. But the truth is, a highly specific program is hardwired into your personal code. Perhaps your highest potential is to create breathtaking, unique wood carvings. If you trust that inner impulse, you will inevitably receive both deep fulfillment from the process itself, material well-being, and genuine recognition from those who need your art. And only after this earthly, material part of your journey is fully lived and integrated, only when this potential is naturally spent, The process of true self-awareness activates calmly and effortlessly. But if social conditioning or the unfulfilled expectations of your parents force you to veer off course, you will turn into a deeply miserable office worker, a person who has ticked all the boxes of a successful life on the outside, but feels a deadening emptiness within. You will never thrive on foreign territory simply because no such trajectory exists in your factory settings. You are trying to run a high-end graphic design software on a pocket calculator. And this inner dissonance is precisely what turns a genuine spiritual call into frantic, desperate chase. When the weight of a life lived on someone else's territory becomes too heavy to bear, the ego pulls off its ultimate trick. It turns spirituality into an escape route or a new project to conquer. Instead of calmly outgrowing the material stage, we start forcing an awakening, not out of genuine readiness, but as a desperate attempt to medicate the numbness of a betrayed inner nature. The Vedic Bhagavad Gita warns about this with absolute precision and severity. It says, "It is far better to perform one's own duties, even if imperfectly, than to master the duties of another. Better is death in the discharge of one's own duty, for the path of another is fraught with danger." In Sanskrit, one's own path, rooted in one's individual nature, is called svadharma. Someone else's path is paradharma. And the Bhagavad Gita states it bluntly: borrowing someone else's road, no matter how glamorous, lucrative, or socially celebrated it looks on social media, destroys our integrity and erases our very essence. When we stubbornly try to walk a foreign path, we commit a quiet internal crime. We betray the very same pure consciousness that chose to embody into this exact physical form with these exact talents and these exact limitations. This consciousness is what every ancient tradition calls God. And that means that every time we try to become someone else, step by step, we betray the divine within ourselves. But this betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It is a slow, invisible process that begins long before we are even capable of conscious choice. The bitterest truth is that many of us step off our path in early childhood. The trauma of rejection, the emotional coldness of caregivers, or a severe fright forces a 3 or 5-year-old child to make an unconscious yet fatal decision. Being myself is dangerous. My true impulses bring pain and threaten me with loneliness. I will lock them away. I will become exactly who they want me to be. The child puts on a mask. The transparent environment of the mind and feelings is replaced by the impenetrable armor of ego programs and conditioning. And from there, a lifelong tragedy unfolds. A person can live to a ripe old age, build a brilliant career, raise children, and achieve high social recognition. Yet inside them, a locked away, terrified child remains, whose consciousness has never actually touched reality directly. This person lived a life of mental concepts and borrowed expectations. They never truly knew themselves. In the Vedic tradition, the natural flow of human life is described through the concept of 4 ashrams, 4 spiritual stages that consciousness passes through in its bodily incarnation. First is called brahmacharya, a period of learning and exploring the world. Second, grihastha, the stage of household life, creation, and fulfilling one's duty to society. Third is vanaprastha, the time of gradual retirement from material attachments and shifting the focus inward. And fourth is sannyasa, the final stage, total renunciation of egoistic desires for union with the divine. The system was not artificially invented. It naturally reflects the very blueprint of human maturation. Ancient wisdom simply captured the objective laws of the psyche, the way our internal potential is meant to unfold gently and sequentially, from birth to departure. But in the modern world, this sacred cycle is broken at the very root. We get stuck in distorted ego consumption and waste our entire earthly resource servicing a false I. In Western psychology, Carl Jung described this exact same phenomenon in detail, calling the process of returning to oneself individuation. Jung wrote that the first half of life is often spent meeting the demands of society and building the ego persona, that very mask. But if, in the second half of life, a person does not begin to gently peel back these layers, if they do not turn toward their true self, their existence hardens into a hollow dead form. We freeze inside this form because as we grow older, we become mortally afraid of instability. We fanatically cling to the illusion of static control, terrified to take even a single step into the unknown. But the paradox is that life is never static, and our very biology tells us that the fear of losing our balance is the mind's ultimate mistake. Look at how the human body is designed. Consider the actual mechanics of how we walk. Pure physiology tells us that walking is not a state of perfect balance. Walking is a controlled falling. Every single step forward begins with us slightly tilting our weight and losing our equilibrium. For a fraction of a second, we are falling, and only then do we throw out a foot to catch ourselves. Moving forward is physically impossible without a willingness to lose your balance over and over again. Children understand this instinctively. They fall hundreds of times while learning to walk, yet no one labels it a failure. But when we grow up, the ego flips the polarity of meaning. What used to be natural learning is now branded as a catastrophe. A dissolved marriage, a failed business, a layoff. We're so panically afraid of falling that we freeze in place. We try to calculate every single step, locking ourselves inside a cage of illusory safety. Yet growth never happens in sterile stability. The psyche itself, sometimes brutally, propels us into crisis, not for comfort of the mind, but to unfold our total potential. And what the ego perceives in the moment as a collapse and a failure, years later turns out to be the ultimate turning point that saved us from living someone else's destiny. Jung famously noted, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And becoming yourself here means stripping away everything superficial so that what was encoded from the very beginning can finally shine through. And this is where we must realize the true depth and scale of our choice. Modern culture operates on the belief that a human being is the absolute architect of their own destiny, in the most egoistic sense of the word. But our true trajectory is already hardwired into our nature. It is a blueprint waiting to be unfolded, not a blank canvas to be painted from scratch. To put it simply, you don't need to design your life, you only need to decode it. Think of it in terms of your blueprint and your highest timeline. These concepts are widely discussed in the spiritual community, but because they are so profound, they can often feel a bit abstract or open to interpretation. To bring some grounded clarity to these ideas, your blueprint is your innate, unchangeable internal architecture, the unique seed of potential you brought into this world. Your highest timeline is that very potential in active friction-free motion. It is the path where your outer reality matches your inner code with absolute precision, turning your existence into an effortless current rather than a constant uphill battle. In other words, your blueprint is the acorn, and your highest timeline is its transformation into the oak tree. Not the pine tree, but the most magnificent oak tree possible. At its core, the only choice we actually have is whether to walk our own path or to step off it. We cannot engineer or reinvent our trajectory. We don't get to invent our path. We can only deviate from it, from the pure potential encoded within us. Under the weight of ego programs, born out of childhood trauma, fears, and borrowed expectations. The saving grace is that the system is inherently self-correcting. You will always be naturally drawn toward your highest timeline. Physics and complexity theory describe this exact phenomenon through the concept of attractors, the points toward which a system naturally tends to move. Our psyche and our destiny possesses their own internal attractor, an optimal state of balance, alignment, and self-actualization. We can resist it for years, burning a massive amount of life force to sustain a false personality. Yet the system will always attempt to pull us back to true equilibrium through crisis, depression, illness, and existential pain. A crisis is not a punishment. It is simply the desperate cry of your path, saying, "Come back, you have wandered too far into foreign territory." But why do we wander into foreign territory in the first place? How is it that a perfect living system begins to glitch and spiral into self-destruction? The answer lies in understanding who is driving. The distortion happens when at some point the mind completely takes over the will of our life, operating under the strict dictation of the ego. And when we begin to filter the impulses of consciousness through the distorted prism of the mental body, the most devastating thing happens. We break the direct contact between consciousness and matter. We stop being pure conduits for life and turn into repeaters for the ego. And the ego, by its very nature, is always deficient, because it is woven entirely out of trauma, resentments, defense mechanisms, and the unintegrated experiences of the past. Restoring this broken connection is exactly what it means to step onto your path. But this is where the ultimate paradox of the spiritual search lies in wait for us. Today, it is widespread to talk about conversing with God or connecting with angels, guides, and cosmic entities. During the stages of purification and integration, a person can indeed live through such experiences. I know this because I lived it myself. For me, it all began with tarot cards, which then led to reading the Akashic records. Soon, I noticed that my regular journaling had quietly evolved into conversations with God. I would ask questions and receive answers that a separate mind couldn't have possibly known or formulated before. I asked about everything, from mundane daily life choices to the grand design of the universe, and I received clear, precise, beautifully articulated answers. This experience is beautiful, and it is entirely real for a specific stage of consciousness. But here is the evolutionary shift. That stage eventually passes. What happens next when the psyche finally integrates? The source of that profound knowledge is no longer perceived as something separate, something external, even if it was previously hidden in a subtle, invisible form. You come to a radical realization. You are that knowledge. Your innermost essence is that knowledge. This is not a shallow New Age concept. In the Vedantic tradition and explicitly laid out in the sacred text Srimad Bhagavatam, the Absolute is defined as Jnanam Advayam, which can be quite literally translated as non-dual knowledge itself. In other words, God is ultimate transcendental knowledge. If everything is a manifestation of divine consciousness and the physical body as a temporary material form is a part of God, then this part inherently contains the whole. It contains all the knowledge. Therefore, self-realization doesn't mean finding an external guide. It means realizing that you are quite literally the knowledge about everything. What this inherently means is that as long as you perceive God, angels, or the higher self as someone separate from you, you are still caught in the illusion of the ego. Because it is only within the dualistic world of the ego that the very concept of someone is transmitting something to me can even exist. If there is no separate me, then how can anyone transmit anything to me? Even perceiving God as a loving father from a psychological standpoint is often a parental projection. A person still needs an external parental figure just to feel safe and protected in this cold world. And I want to make it radically clear, I am not dismissing this experience. In fact, it is a crucial, deeply sacred part of the process. But the truth is, you are not separate from what you call God. You are consciousness. You are God, or rather, that specific part of the divine that is right now living out a unique experience inside this exact human body. The experience as a phenomenon of the psyche is real, but its interpretation by the ego is an illusion, and it is crucial to clarify this immediately. This does not mean that your ego is God. On the contrary, this is exactly where the ultimate shattering paradox lies hidden. When we talk about the ego as something that drives our decisions and choices, it can easily create the impression that the ego is some kind of separate entity. But the truth is, the ego doesn't actually exist as an independent living structure. It is a structural hallucination of the mind. And precisely because it objectively does not exist, the ego lives in a state of permanent existential terror of its own non-existence. To drown out this subconscious fear and somehow prove to itself that it is real, the ego desperately, painfully tries to assert itself through the external world. It completely depends on outside validation, hence the relentless drive for fame, power, status, social masks, and total control. It is an attempt by a vacuum to gain density through the reflection of other people's eyes and applause. This is where the deepest tragedy of the inflated ego lies, and narcissism as its extreme terminal form. A narcissist is not someone who has too much self. A narcissist is a person with such a ringing, pitch-black void inside that their attempts to force proof of their existence out of others become agonizing, hypertrophied, and destructive. And while narcissism is an extreme form that is easy to use as an example, the tragedy of modern society is that it is built entirely on the deficits of the ego. Social institutions, the culture of success, and to greater or lesser degrees even modern religions are constructed upon it. Because as long as you perceive God as someone external, a fearsome judge or a distant absolute that you must please, you remain under the rule of the ego, which is the very thing creating the illusion of separation. Yet the value of religion lies in introduction of what it calls the soul and what modern psychology refers to as psyche. In essence, the soul is a transitional state between the total tyranny of the ego and pure consciousness. But it is vital not to confuse concepts. Many make a fundamental error by viewing the soul as their ultimate true self. It is not. If we look at how mystical teachings originally defined the soul, it is essentially a mental and emotional medium, a subtle body that has not yet been fully purified from the dictation of ego programs. It has its boundaries, but it does not exist independently. It is our instrument, a prism for navigating the material world. And if this prism is clouded by the ego, our navigation shutters. Imagine walking through a dense forest. In your hands, you hold a detailed, clear map. By 25, achieve this. By 35, obtain that. By 50, reach here. For a while, everything goes according to a plan. But at a certain point, the path beneath your feet simply vanishes, and the landscape stops matching the paper. For the ego, this is a reason to panic. I'm lost, I made a mistake. But what if the mind's map was simply too primitive for the vastness of reality from the very beginning? At this exact point of uncertainty, the ego is forced to capitulate, and the map it created must burn. Only then do we notice that the territory of life is infinitely deeper than our plans. We begin to see what cannot be seen with physical eyes. Vedic philosophy offers a deeply beautiful perspective on how we come to realize the divine, describing this journey in three sequential stages. First is Brahman, the impersonal effulgence, then as Paramatma, the supersoul dwelling within the heart, and finally as Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. But what does it actually mean to realize the personality of Godhead? It means to realize yourself as a unique personality of God. Every single individual on earth is a personality of God, divine consciousness manifested in form. The only difference lies in whether a person realizes this or not. And this is the cosmic joke of existence. At the end of the path, we inevitably awaken to the fact that no separate I, no ego persona actually exists. Yet we cannot arrive at this universal experience until we purify the subtle body, the mental and emotional medium, and integrate all the scattered, wounded parts of our psyche. We cannot transcend what we have not first put together. Only by becoming a totally integrated personality, a true, authentic subject, do we finally gain the capacity to transcend subjectivity itself. True alignment and authentic purpose often begins exactly where the map completely stops working and the road vanishes. Self-realization is the only genuine task of a human being, and it is an entirely unique road. There are as many paths as there are people. The truth is, there is no spiritual path. You are the path. Your life itself, with all its faults, errors, crises, and triumphs, is not a chaotic wandering through an infernal forest. It is the exact path through which pure consciousness experiences and knows itself using this specific body. The body's only real task is to feel where consciousness is seeking to direct its energy, and not get in the way of its manifestation into matter. This is precisely why we clear the subtle body of blocks, so that it does not distort the pure light as it shines through. And it is exactly at this intersection that what pop spirituality calls the manifestation of reality is born. Pop spirituality feeds us the notion: you are a magician, you can manifest anything you want. But that is an illusion. Manifestation is not about you being a magician, pulling a random rabbit out of a hat just to satisfy the fleeting ambitions of the ego. You cannot force into reality something that your path does not fundamentally entail. Or rather, you can squeeze it out of the quantum field through a monumental toxic effort of willpower, but it will be highly unstable, it will demand an immense expenditure of vital energy, and worst of all, it will not bring you a single drop of deep fulfillment when you finally get it. The phenomenon that people actually mean when they talk about true manifestation, where desire and reality merge, is in essence a perfect synchronization. It is the exact moment when the mist of the ego clears, your internal media becomes crystal clear and transparent, and you finally fall into total alignment with your highest potential, your highest timeline. At this point, you are no longer creating reality from your mind. You are allowing reality to manifest through you, unimpeded, pristine, and beautiful. The beautiful thing is, you can never truly lose it, because remember, you are the path. You cannot lose yourself. You can only get temporarily tangled up in the labyrinths of the mind and other people's maps. So what is there to do? How do you find your way back to this path if it feels like you lost it a long time ago? All you really need to do is simply learn to see. All of what we call spiritual growth isn't about collecting new titles, initiations, or exotic practices. It is simply about softening into the ability to see what your eyes cannot catch. Your shadow, the parts of yourself you've pushed away, the hidden threads between events, and the breathtaking, beautiful orchestration of everything that has ever happened in your life. Coming home isn't about gathering new skills. It's not about layering smart concepts or esoteric terms over old wounds. It is a process of unraveling. It's the gentle clearing of the subtle, emotional body, allowing it to become that clear, open space that effortlessly and beautifully connects consciousness with the physical world. It's about healing trauma, finally allowing yourself to just sit with and feel the pain you once had to lock away. It's about letting go of everyone else's expectations and offering yourself a quiet, steady promise. Yes, I may not have fulfilled your hopes, but I chose to stay true to the source within me. It's about bringing feeling back into the body through breath, through presence, and by embracing your own unique biological nature. When the blocks melt away, everything becomes clear again, and you don't have to agonizingly figure out where to go. Consciousness, no longer fighting the fears and concepts of the ego, begins to fluidly, wisely, and effortlessly carry you through the storms of life. The right people find you, the right moments unfold, the exact choices appear. You just find yourself right there in the moment, doing exactly what needs to be done. You don't need to build a path. You just need to stop getting in the way of how it wants to unfold before you. Let the light of consciousness flow through you cleanly, without catching on anything. Be transparent. Be you. Because in the end, you are the most beautiful thing that could have ever unfolded.